Welcome to November 16th weekly webinar. What I'm going to be going over is the average yields and estimated yields and where we shape up year after year. Most of you have seen this before. A couple of you are new and you haven't. This is the database. This is a fictitious name, AAA Farms. But basically we have our acres seeded, we have what we estimate in the winter for getting for a yield, and what we actually produce. And then you can see up here are the buttons for wheats, canolas, malt, feed barley, peas, whatever we produce. Basically that's where I'm getting the numbers from today, is these numbers are my group's numbers. So like I've told many of you before, numbers never lie. You can always stretch the numbers to make them work in your favor, but numbers never lie, and now you know where I'm getting the numbers from, and I went all the way back to 5-6 years and took the average for our group. As you see, in 09-10, our group on canola was estimating an average yield of 42, but we only got 33. So now we'll get into how these numbers work and why they are important. So here we have the canola historic yields. Let me just grab my highlighter. As you saw all the way back to 2006, the blue line right here, I apologize because I never put the yield on here, but in the next slides I did do that. So this is what we were estimating. So this was our estimated yield in 2006. We were estimating basically 32 bushels an acre. We blew by that and averaged 40 as a group. Now, I know some of you are thinking, oh, geez, I've never produced 32 or even estimated 32. You got to remember, this is an average. It doesn't pertain to your farm. Some of the next slides we'll be getting into will come back to your farm, but this is basically so that when we're sitting down starting this last year in 2011 and into the next year when we sit down this winter and the next few months, I'm telling you what your averages are. You're not guessing anymore, and you're not telling me, because what we have here is data across 6 years. After next year, over 7 years. After the year after that, we'll have 8. And data is what can be used to give us some important numbers which to base all of our sales and my sales recommendations off of. So I guess what I want to really point out here with the canola, as you see the black line is the actual production, and you see we had a really good year in 2008. That was a very good growing season for canola. You'll see on the next slides it wasn't so good for other crops, but for canola it was really good because we had some pretty good moisture through the flowering stage, but then got a real good shot of blast of heat. And another thing, just going back in my memory, in 2008 we had a good chunk of the crop in probably by the first week of May. So, that is definitely a key factor. Now that I have these stats, I can use these stats to go back and add another bar and maybe put what the average rainfall for May was. And I'm sure there would be a direct correlation, especially in these years, for average rainfall in May and timely seeding and how that affects yield outcome. But that could get very boring very quick. So it's just something to concentrate on. I guess the biggest thing I want to point out is why last year when we sat down, I told everybody I'm going to give you your estimated yield, is because basically we've only come close 1 year in 2008. And then the 2 next years, everybody was thinking that, oh, I can grow this crop, which was, in the 40s, some of you up into the 50 to 55 bushels an acre. But it never materialized. So if we're pricing 25, 35, 45% of our crop before sometimes you even have it in the ground, we can't go off of this number. We have to go off of what is more accurate, what we're actually going to produce. So you see last year, basically, the average for my group was 38 bushels. We produced 41 across the board. So That was our closest year we ever had besides 2008, but more likely a realistic year as well. So next slide. Now what this slide is representing here is Nexera historic yields. And the reason I threw Nexera in here is because the Nexera salesmen, especially if you're an agri-trade, were out there thumping their chests of why it's the best thing since sliced bread. And here's what Nexera historic yields actually came out to. You see we're at 25, 40. Again, 2008, you notice the last slide with canola was regular canola was higher as well too. But back to more realistic years, 21, 38. And you see what we were averaging, what we thought we might get for Nexera. We've never even come close, especially in this year. We were 10 bushels an acre less in 2007. And, you know, on an average, you'll see in the next slide when I compare Nexera to regular canola, you'll see where I'm coming from when I am disappointed in Nexera. The biggest thing in 2006, of course, is when I started my company, but if you go back in the previous years, that's when I was buying grain, and of course for Louis Dreyfus, which we had many contracts for Nexera from 2002 onwards, and they're still in the game. One thing I want to point out is why there were no acres in anybody in my group growing it in 2006 was because in the previous years, the green was upwards of 15%. So obviously, I remember buying the stuff. I remember having one guy come in and say, listen, I got 45 bushels an acre with zero green on my Invigor, and my Nexera I combined 3 weeks later with 15% green and only got 38 bushels. So he said he would never grow it again. Whether he is or not, I don't know. He's not a current client of mine. So, but I just remember that's what leads into having 0 acres in my group, which are progressive thinking farmers. That's why you guys are part of my group. Now you go into 2011, I had 0 acres in my group of Nexera as well, and that is simply because, again, guys just are not seeing the economic value of growing Nexera, and when we're dealing with high cost of production, which we'll be covering on another webinar later on, you'll see where we've got to choose the right crops for your area. Just because your neighbors are growing it or a friend of yours 30 miles away doesn't necessarily mean you have to be growing it as well. Okay, on to the third slide, and this is the key one I was talking about. This is regular canola versus Nexera. So regular canola is in the black column, and Nexera is in the green column. And you'll see year after year, regular canola is out yielding the Nexera. Of course, I only have 4 years of data because of 2006 and 2011, which I already went over. So we saw, especially coming off of this year here, I should say, this was the big year where they introduced Roundup Ready. So this was probably the biggest year, 2009, that I had in my group that anybody was growing it. You saw the yield close a bit, and then there's only 4 bushels an acre difference. But then you saw in the 2010, more guys even in my group tried it, but they also realized that it was upwards of around 6 to, let me get this a little bit better. It was upwards of around 6 to 8% green, and that basically kiboshed any more acres going in the ground for 2011. And then you saw the yield difference of 8 bushels an acre from just any, and I'm not saying the regular canola is all Invigor. I mean, I have guys who grow Roundup, so this is a combination number of Roundup and Invigor. If I was just to strictly pull Invigor numbers, I believe it consistently is 10 bushels an acre more on the difference between the regular canola and nexera. So now you see where I'm coming from. I could care less if the salesman's telling you it's the best thing since sliced bread. I just look at the economics of your farm. That's what you pay me for, and at the end of the day, that's all that counts. Sometimes it's good to be into new things, like we're trying producer cars, but nobody else is even thinking about it. Doing our own color sorting, stuff like that. But sometimes it's not good to be the first guy into other stuff. And I really feel with the price difference, or with the bushel difference in yield, we need at least, especially with these high prices, even if it were 8, if you figure out 8 bushels an acre on 12, let's say an average of $12, that's upwards of $100 an acre. So they can offer you the moon all they want. So basically, there isn't a premium that anybody is offering for nexera that can make up this gap right here of 8 bushels an acre. So, but again, phone me. We can talk more privately. I think the guys who were contemplating it have already talked to me. And, of course, that's what triggered this webinar on yields. I wanted to get into using my data. So this next slide is malt barley historic yields, and a few things I want to point out. Again, we were never closer except for this year. Even last year we were fairly close, but we were never closer until I started telling everybody what their average is for malt barley. You can see everybody was thinking we could get 60 or 70. For some reason, 2007 it dropped down to 60, but everybody's thinking 70, 70. We're only averaging 60. There again, that comes into if we've got to start looking at should we be growing? Sorry, I'm just trying to think and move my mouse at the same time. Should we be growing malt, or should we be growing a wheat in its place? And again, I can't use general numbers to describe your farm, but this is one thing that we can talk about, and hopefully you can think about before we meet in the next 6 weeks, and we can talk about it. You can see I'll be comparing malt barley and feed barley, and really it's a wash with the price difference, especially of what we're at this year. So I guess when it's all said and done, on the malt barley side of things, for what we were estimating to what we're actually seeing, it's going to vary year to year for each farm, but we're averaging 60. If we're penciling in, let's say $6 for an average price of malt barley, obviously that's $360 an acre. So then we're down to what our cost of production says. And this, again, is why we've seen with the lower yields across the board, especially in Alberta where we get some of the higher yields on barley, we've seen malt barley likely running into specialty crop phase, where once it gets under 6 million acres in the ground, especially with the wheat board hopefully going bye-bye in the next month or so, or dual market opening up, we're going to have to see prices go up in order to see, we're going to have to see more dollars per acre, or guys just aren't going to grow it. And keep in mind, this is something I discuss with RAR all the time, the economics of malt barley compared to the economics of wheat. And that's what's I feel is going to get really competitive once we get into having a dual market system, as the competition, not necessarily for canola, obviously, that's going to be its own struggles with finding acres, but the wheats and the barleys. And the first person out with good contracts in January, February, when guys are really starting to think about what they're going to seed and clean up, they're going to be the first ones getting acres, and that's what I feel is going to happen. That's why I want to meet with everybody before Christmas, because I feel after in January we're going to see RAR come out with some big prices, and potentially we're going to see some grain companies coming out with some prices off of Minneapolis wheat. We see Minneapolis wheat trading at March is trading at 8.81. So all of a sudden, if they're doing some hedging and come up with some kind of pricing, they can come back to us and potentially offer a fairly good price that is at least going to make us consider doing some pre-pricing on wheat. We don't have to do a crazy fixed price program like we do with the wheat board. We'll be dealing just with a single company and whatever deductions and contracts they have. So what we see here is, I don't know if you remember the last number that was shown on the malt barley, but we see 72 here. This last year, 72 bushels an acre, and 60 for malt. So 72 on feed, 60 to malt. Again, when it comes down to it, we do our crop comparison. We can plug in. It doesn't matter if we go 1 acre or anything. If we've got 72 and 60, feed, malt, price per bushel, and of course, I'll just use this year's prices. 425. I feel we'll get higher than that, but that's another webinar. This year, most of us are locked in of at least about 615 for malt barley contracts. Cost of production, I haven't done what my average cost of production is, but let's just say it is 333. And of course, it's the same pretty much to produce malt barley. Actually, I should say most of the malt barley was about $7 an acre more due to trucking, because feed barley we get picked up at the bin. You see, here's the difference. We need a spread of basically $2 a bushel. Even if it narrowed up to $1.75, it would get into almost a wash scenario, depending which one was higher and lower. But even at 72 bushels an acre on feed barley, here, let me just grab my highlighter. You're going to lose $27 an acre. Was even at 60 bushels of malt barley. And of course, these are average numbers, not your numbers, but again, to get an average of 60, obviously some of you are lower than this. Then we're sitting at basically, you're making $29 an acre. And last time I checked, you're in the business to make money, not grow the most amount of grain on your farm. And that is really, that's going to be a future webinar as to what to expect when the wheat board's gone. But that is really what's going to happen, I believe, once the wheat board goes, is we're going to have to look at what's best for your farm, not what gets you the most bushels, because the most bushels won't necessarily pay if everybody in the world is growing the most bushels, a la wheat, which seems to be the scenario, is the overabundance of wheat in the markets. One thing I do want to point out, though, with this, with the feed barley, you see the yields have been coming up, and I really believe that's due to better varieties out there, less lodging, bushel weight probably being higher, because you got to remember, if you're growing 53, 54 pound barley, every 6 bushels you're gaining a bushel, so just due to weight. So again, that's one trend, but of course the trend in my group is very little feed barley growing in the ground anyways. For some reason I didn't compare feed barley to malt barley, but nonetheless I may do that and post it up to the website. So hard red spring wheat, you'll see here what we are averaging throughout the years, or we're estimating. That has come up dramatically in the group. We've kind of leveled off, though, for around 37 bushels an acre average is what we're estimating. But you see, we're excelling, or exceeding, I should say, what we're estimating this last year. I would sooner be growing more and be a little bit conservative on the blue line, which is the estimate, than to be estimating that we're going to average 42 as a group, but we only grow 33. You see this came down because I think I sat at your guys' table and said, I don't think that's quite your average. And again, we want to get into this where we're exceeding what we're estimating, because next year this blue line will be a little bit higher across the board. And I mean, of course, I can't control the weather, neither can you. We can't control the seeding dates, but we definitely want to be, when we're pre-pricing any kind of crop, which hard red spring wheat, I'm sure we'll be doing a lot of for cash flow delivery periods. We don't have to just rely on peas and canola anymore. We'll be using this blue line to be deriving our numbers from. So that's why it's important to have this blue line as accurate as we can. CPS, there's still a few of you growing CPS. A few have gone back to it. That'll be another webinar in the spring, or I don't know, January, February, once I have all my seeded acres, and we'll go through where the acres are changing year after year. I guess if some of you that are new and haven't seen that, I've left it up on the website under Chart of the Week, the FBC acreage changes. So you can log in and view. Of course, this was before I was doing videos, so I had to type everything in there. You know, the next one will just have a link where you can click and hear me talk about all this stuff. But you see where CPS in 2006 was basically half of my wheat acres. And now it's not that wheat acres were basically 35%. Wheat acres were actually close to 36% this last year. But you saw, or you can see where the red column is growing, where out of the 36% of my acres are of wheat, 32 are hard red and only just under 4 is CPS. And you saw this gap come down. What happened is we had a couple of dry years in here. CPS does not do well in dry years. It never will. I actually had guys growing both and were growing less CPS than hard red. So it's just a sign of the times. You know, more money. And I really feel this number will get next to zero once the wheat border's out of the equation, because we saw it this year. All my CPS was number one, and we're selling it for feed just due to pricing. So back to this chart though. You see, you know, the last couple of years, 67, 71 for an average. And if I go back to the hard reds, we're 33 and 41. Now, for the guys that are growing both, I would probably say, without going into my database, that they're only about maybe maximum 5 bushels behind. You got to remember, I have some customers out east, down south, where they don't grow any CPS, but their yields are a little bit less. So it brings down the total, the average in general on the hard red spring wheat. Again, that's why we still meet in the winter, and we still talk about what is best for your farm, because then I take in what you're actually growing on your farm, or what your neighbor right next door is getting on maybe some hard red spring wheat that he's growing. So the last slide I'm going to do here is peas, and this is probably one of the biggest eye-openers I had for peas, or for any of these charts. And it was basically due to the fact of we only really exceeded what we were thinking for an average, and that was in 2007. I believe I had 3 guys growing peas. What we saw here is the pea acres really went up. So the more that I had growing peas in 2009 and 2010, you remember I only had maybe 1 to 3 customers in these couple of years growing it. But with the high fertilizer prices in 2008, everybody got into peas in 2009. Well, the time to be in the peas would have been in this year, because in 2007, sure, they only got maybe 5 bushels an acre, but what they recouped for fertilizer, using less fertilizer, so basically a cost of production gain, because it lowered their cost of production, was phenomenal. And it was all from growing peas this year. In 2009, everybody got into peas because their agronomists were saying, oh, it uses less nitrogen, and nitrogen is $900. But really, they should have been growing it in these 2 years in order to save the money in 2009. And then what happened here is we had just a severely wet year. I remember some guys were already done their wheat before they're combining their peas. Peas, again, you grow peas so that you're combining them hopefully 2 weeks earlier than anything else, to kind of spread your harvest out. If you've got to, set your combine different and everything else right in the middle of a tough harvest, a lot of guys got out of them, especially in 2011. I think I was back down to only 4 guys growing, where in this year, in 2009, 2010, I had roughly 10 to 12 guys growing peas. So again, once we sit down and we're talking about our average or our actual yield, I don't think we can shoot for the moon anymore. I think we've got to take kind of what the group is getting, what you're getting. Of course, if you're new to growing peas, we don't have any averages for you. But what I'll have to do is just take an average for the group, and that average would probably be running right around 38 bushels, 36 bushels an acre. And that's where we do any of our pre-pricing off of. Okay, so that's all I've got for this short little webinar. I'm not sure if there are any questions. Again, I pointed out before, but some of you may have joined a little bit later. You can type your questions in the box right here, or you can always text them to me, or keep it in your mind and talk to me later. But nobody can see your question you're sending to me anyway, so don't feel bad if you have any. If you don't want to ask a question, if you think it's not going to be up to par with the webinar, but I'll answer it nonetheless. Oh yeah, I got one question here. Then it goes back to the slide with Nexera. Just clear this up. And the question is Nexera versus regular canola. And it says, do you feel that the Nexera premium of a $40 over basis is enough? I guess I kind of breezed over that, and I know which company this person's talking about. A 40 over basis, I don't really care for them, and I'll show you why. I'm just going to log into Viterra's basis levels here so I can use actual numbers. What basis levels are more of a reflection, and that 40 over, you've got to remember, that 40 over is for July delivery. Now, what these guys are doing is, let's say they're promoting a 40 over. Well, our regular basis is 29 or 22 under right now, so that works out to a $66 premium. But that's false, because they're already jumping ahead to 2012. And we saw, let's just take that scenario last year. If that same company I know was offering, I think, a 44 or a 38 over for July. Right now, that would only be a $40 premium compared to what their basis is right now. And then going back to this chart, $40 isn't near enough to be losing $8 a bushel. I mean, it's simple. I know it sounds simple math, and I wish I could draw like I can with my finger, but of course I'm using a mouse. You take 8 bushels an acre times your 12. That equals, of course, 96. So if they're only offering you $44 an acre, how is that feasible? How do you like my 6? But anyways, no matter how I draw a 6, even that 9 as the first number still trumps 4 as the first number. So again, it comes down to simple economics for your farm and taking care of your farm first, not what some salesman says. And now you also have to remember one thing I never crossed over or talked about with the Nexera is you only have 4 delivery periods throughout the year. Really what happened too is in 2010, the grain companies, or in 2009, the grain companies said they were taking February, promised you the moon, or January that year, and nobody hauled it till March. So A, how did that help cash flow? How did it help during road ban season? How did it help you for bins? Because you got to segregate it. You can't put these two canolas together. I guess you see where I'm coming from. It's I really don't care for Nexera, and just because the economics just aren't there. If we could ever narrow up this gap between 38 and 46, then maybe I would be recommending it. But it's great in concept, but there is a lot more money out there that companies aren't offering you, and they're pocketing. They only make it as attractive as they have to, and it isn't attractive enough. So that was my one and only question. So I guess I'm just going to check my texts here. Nope, nobody texted me a question.